Just as St. Luke gives us the announcement of the birth at a very particular time among particular people in a particular place, so Matthew too begins his birth story at the time of King Herod, historically a very dangerous figure. And then he goes on to the sighting of a new star, the story of the wise men coming from the east. The sun rises in the east. So this is a direction of new beginnings, of hope arising in the face of darkness. As the prophet Isaiah proclaimed, "Arise, shine, for your light has come." But Isaiah is announcing this in the midst of destruction. The Israelites return home from exile and the city is in ruins. It feels more like a disaster than a new beginning. But it's in the midst of that darkness that Isaiah announces light breaking in, a new beginning, and goes on to suggest, "Then you shall see and be radiant. Your heart shall thrill and rejoice." And so it is, Matthew tells us, that when the star had stopped over the place where the child was, the wise men were overwhelmed with joy. But not Herod. When Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. King Herod is consumed by fear over the threat of the Messiah. Where is the newborn king of the Jews? It's not too wise to ask that of the current king. King Herod is frightened of this new and unknown element, but he'll go to any length to protect his power. In the verses that follow this episode, there is the story of the slaughter of the children under 2 years of age. And later, of course, Matthew is pointing to another Herod who will put Jesus to death on the cross. Like Luke's story of the child Jesus lost in the temple, Matthew is giving us a little glimpse, a preview of the whole gospel in this birth narrative. Matthew's gospel is written near the end of the first century, after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. With the temple destroyed, life is no longer the same for the Jews, even for this new messianic community of Jews. So the wise men come, in Matthew's telling, bringing gifts of gold, myrrh, and frankincense. These are profound references to the temple in Jerusalem, references that the messianic Jews will recognize and interpret. Myrrh for royal and priestly anointing, frankincense for the highest sacrificial offering, all held in vessels of gold. So Matthew is symbolically transferring the great temple to the infant Jesus, the Messiah and emissary of a new inner temple. The star led the Magi to the house of Joseph. In Matthew's Gospel, Joseph and Mary lived in their home in Bethlehem, where they were presumably quite comfortable. Of course, on Christmas, we read the Gospel from Luke, where the baby is wrapped in swaddling clothes and placed in a manger. So that image is so dominant that most of the pictures, I looked and looked online, most of the pictures have the wise men coming to the manger. But the wise men live in Matthew's Gospel, not in Luke's Gospel. In Matthew's Gospel, Mary and Joseph did not wander looking for a place to have their child, nor did they take refuge in a stable or lay their baby in a manger. But Matthew tells us, on entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. So Matthew's pointing to a very important point. I think in the New Testament, whenever you read the word house, we're talking about the church. There were no churches until the 4th century. So the early Christian community met in houses. So if you enter a house, you're in church. And Matthew is telling us that the outsiders, the Gentiles, are now in the house. They're in the church. For Matthew, Christ came to save Gentiles as well as Jews. Salvation is open to all, and outsiders can discern divine revelation that the insiders might even miss. St. Paul makes this quite clear, that this is the work of the Spirit, that God, in former times, had only chosen the Jews, but now God has opened salvation to all people. But imagine how disruptive this can be. First of all, the temple is gone, so that was your identity as a Jew. And now, the hallmark of Judaism was to be the chosen people. And now it's not so special anymore. Not only has God chosen the Jews, but God has chosen everyone else. This means simply for the early Christians that they went from being a Jewish community, having a Jewish identity, to being something else, a world community. And they're not quite sure what that means. All they know is that the past doesn't work anymore. And they're not quite sure who they are as they move into the future. This took many generations to work this through in the New Testament. So Matthew's giving us some important spiritual hints on how to navigate this kind of transition, how to navigate this journey of change. First, he gives us the image of a star, the metaphor for the Spirit that guides us. When we face significant change in our lives, there's always great upheaval. In one of the readings we sometimes read at funerals from the Book of Wisdom, the author is talking about the death of a just one. He writes, "In the eyes of the unwise, their going forth from us looked like disaster." Disaster is an interesting word. It comes from two Latin words, dis and astre, like astrology, meaning separated from one's star. We face disaster when we are separated from our inner guiding principle, separated from our deep inner wisdom. As Herod feared the threat of Jesus, he tried to protect the seat of his power. Similarly, our fears and ignorance encourage us to hold on to what we feel is secure in the face of a new life path being offered to us. But in the midst of disaster, God still offers invitation and new birth. We will find our way back home, but it will require that we travel by another road. In our church today, have you noticed that as Pope Francis is playing the role of the prodigal father, opening wide the doors of mercy so that everyone is welcome to come in and receive God's grace, the elder brother who lives in the house is frantically trying to close the doors, not able to enter into the joy of the Father. The fears we feel at our personal new birth mirror the difficulties of Jesus' arrival. Our birth, equally unexpected, is also a home birth. The spiritual journey begins in the middle of our ordinary life. We have no exotic locales to distract us. So as we try to deal with change, we experience a wide range of feelings. One is a sense of dislocation, where the world we knew isn't there anymore, and the new world isn't quite recognizable. Sometimes it is accompanied by feelings of estrangement, loneliness, and discomfort, which we often try to ignore or push away. We experience the brokenness, sometimes as fear, and sometimes in depression. Still, we have somehow heard our invitation to a new life. We've gathered our courage, and despite our trepidation, we begin to move forward, one step at a time. But our difficulties have continued unabated. The messengers of the king of fear, our ego, is still on the hunt. Dogs our every step. But in the midst of our disorientation, the Magi will pay us a visit, as they did Jesus. We don't know what form they will take, or what specific gifts of wisdom they will bring. The presents they offer may be small, a piece of the past resolved, or very large, an unshakable communication with inner spirit. But the gifts they bring are always precious and powerful. We will find these presents to be tools for our journey, holding the same prominence and solemnity of the ancient gold, frankincense, and myrrh. We'll need to keep an eye out for the Magi. And when we receive their messages, be attentive so that their wisdom can unfold for us as we travel the new road.